This video is sponsored by KEH Camera.
What is good? Welcome back to the channel, y'all. Today we are talking about Cinestill 400D, D for dynamic. A couple things I really want to mention about this film since I've been messing around with it a lot recently. First off, what does dynamic mean? Well, we'll talk about that a bit more later, but for now, I just want to say that dynamic basically means this film can be shot in camera at multiple ISOs at once. So this isn't push and pulling. This is basically exposing your image at whatever ISO you feel like between 200 and 800. So that's three stops right there, 200, 400, 800. That's pretty interesting. That's basically saying you'll get usable results whether you're using any of those ISOs. And my hunch is that it probably depends on the lighting situation. Of course, in daylight, you could get away with a lot more, but I'm curious about night light. Real quick, I know a lot of you probably already know this, but what exactly is Cinestill 400D? Well, without getting into the exact details and arguing semantics, what we do know at least is that this is based off of the same exact emulsion that's used for motion picture film, specifically in this case, 250D. And that's great because 250D is an incredible film, Vision 3 250D, and that's what's used by cinematographers for high-end, movies, stuff like that, anything using motion picture film. So this film 400D is that, but cross-processed, because when you process that film in C41, you're technically not processing it the way that it was designed. That film was designed originally, the Vision 3 film, that was designed for ECN2 processing, which yields very flat negatives that are good for scanning for the digital kind of workflow. This right here is developed in C41, which is the classic color negative process, and that gives you a bit more of a contrasty negative with a bit more saturation, a bit more punch. It looks great on Cinestill 800T, for example. So you be the judge for this one if it looks good for Cinestill 400D. So looking at these examples here, you really can tell that this is quality film at its core. You got really good sharpness, you got really good kind of dynamic range. The images are just looking very kind of natural. This is supposed to give you a pretty good depiction of what reality is for the most part. I find that the colors tend to be a bit warm, maybe a hint of magenta here and there depending on the light scenario, but you really get true to life colors. That's something I really like about this film. You can use this the way you would use Portra or any of the other kind of higher end films and expect to get really quality, legit results. One thing you really do have to talk about is the halation. That, of course, is not something that's present in most of the other film stocks, and we already know why it's present here, and that's because of the lack of remjet in this film. The halation, I think for Cinestill 800T, for example, the classic kind of halation, that is something that people love because it really adds this interesting pop to those nighttime scenes where you have really strong lights in the background, lights that are hitting the camera directly. In the daytime, you do get halation with this film, with 400D, and that can be a bit strange. I think sometimes it takes away from images. I personally don't really enjoy the halation that much, specifically on 400D, but that's kind of a taste thing. Some people like it, others don't. I don't think it makes or breaks this film, because the halation doesn't completely overtake or dominate your scenes, but it is there. And you're going to see it, for example, if the sun is somewhere in your image, or if you have any kind of lights pointed directly at your subject, or if the light that you're kind of using, for example, if you're in the studio, if that's too hot, if you're using not like a softbox, if you're using something a bit more direct and harsher, you might notice that glow coming off of someone's skin via halation. So just something to keep in mind. You probably want to keep that kind of very locked when you're doing your shooting to ensure that you're getting as much halation as you want or do not want. So something to keep in mind there, but I don't think it takes away from the beauty of this film. You get really rich colors with this film. It's not like slide film, of course, that's a whole different league, but you still get really good colors here for a color negative film. And I really think it adds a valuable kind of different look compared to something like Portra, for example, that has its own color palette. So I really enjoyed the look of this film, and again, I'm not surprised because the base product here is Vision 3 250D, and that film is stellar. So this is going to be no different. All right, let's actually talk about the dynamic aspect. I mentioned earlier it means you can shoot your film at different ISOs in camera. So I did a couple of different bracketing tests where I have a -1, which would be rated at 800. You got your 0, which is rated 400. Then you've got your +1, which would be rated at 200. Let's take a look at these images.
All right, so here we have 3 examples of images shot on Cinestill 400D. This is a quick exposure test here. So on the left, we've got a +1 exposure. Here we have 0, and here we have -1. And it's all rated at 400. So you could say this right here is rated at 200, this is rated at 400, and this is rated at 800. And again, this was all done on the same roll. This is not push process or anything like that, just 3 consecutive photos. You can clearly see the effect that you have right here on the exposure based on how you rate it. So on the 800 exposure here, in low light, because this is definitely a low light scenario, just a light bouncing off the wall, you can see here that the exposure is much darker in the shadows, of course, which makes total sense. And the color is shifted a little bit as well. It's a much warmer image, and I think you'll see this later in another example as well. In the middle image here, not really much to say, but you've got adequate exposure here between the highlights and the shadows. And again, very low contrasty scene, low light. So you're gonna have deep shadows regardless for this particular example. In the plus one here, you see you get a lot more detail in the shadows, as you can see here on the shirt, over here as well, a little bit more down here, even though, again, very low light example. And the most dramatic thing is the color shift. This is a much more neutral looking image because it's overexposed technically. So really interesting to see this film perform across the board. I think depending on the type of images you're creating, this might be acceptable, especially if you're out on the street doing street photography, stuff like that. But if you're in the studio and you're doing something that's kind of more pro and looking to have very specific colors and accuracy, you might not want to rate this film at 800 without push processing it. Let's look at one more example here. I've got 3 images here. My friend Nico. Image in the middle is the 0 one, and then as you look to the right and to the left, you can see the plus one here and the minus one. Similar as before, much deeper shadows here, less texture and less detail in the beard as compared to the plus one. We have a lot more, and then of course the color shift as well. You can really see it here in the wood. In the middle here, it's a bit more neutral. This is daylight, therefore it's kind of blue. And it's got a bit of that kind of coolness. Here, you get a bit more warmth in the detail and the colors here. And of course, here in the overexposed one, it's a lot more blue overall. In general, I think in daylight examples, you can really get away with using this film at whatever ISO you want, from 2 to 800. But honestly, if you're in daylight, why would you use it at 800? I assume you have enough light, so you probably wouldn't feel like you need to push it up there to 800. When I say push again here, I don't mean push process. I just meant, you know, expose it at a higher ISO, higher base ISO. So yeah, in the daytime, you know, less apparent shifts, even though you still get the difference in detail. But if we look at a nighttime or kind of low light example, that's where you're really going to start to see the difference. Film is very light hungry. We know that. It doesn't matter what film you use. More light is typically better. And therefore, if you have less light, this is technically underexposed as opposed to being kind of like, let's say, dynamic. So it's your choice, but it's good for you to know and see what the difference is here. A quick shout out to the sponsor of this video, KH Camera. My recent YouTube video made it very clear to me that a lot of film shooters are considering digital cameras as a way to mitigate the cost of shooting film. If that's you, you should definitely take a look at KH. KH has a massive catalog of pre-owned cameras that have been reviewed for quality and functionality. They review and grade each and every single camera, allowing you to choose whatever option suits your budget best. You will know exactly what condition your equipment is before buying it. Purchasing pre-owned cameras and gear from KH means you can shop with confidence, knowing your equipment has been cleaned, reviewed, and thoroughly graded. They offer a 180-day warranty and a generous 21-day return policy, and even additional protection via a program called Extend. I know online auction sites can be very tempting, but it's probably best that you go with a trusted and secure option like KH. If you're looking to make a purchase from KH, please use the links in the description below to help support this channel with affiliate links, but also get yourself a discount offer. Happy camera shopping.
So what do you think? I know Cinestill 400D has been out there for some time now. You know, it came out of that Kickstarter, and there was a lot of kind of stuff leading up to a lot of marketing and a lot of talk and all that. Definitely think this film lives up to the hype, and it's definitely a valuable addition to any arsenal. It's interesting though on pricing. This basically costs the same as Portra, and if you build Portra as kind of like the professional film, then, you know, some people probably want to argue that this should be much cheaper than Portra, given that the cross-processing and the halation and all that kind of moves it away from quote-unquote professional. But again, that's kind of just opinion. People can argue that. Some might think it's not legit. But either way, it's interesting price-wise how this is basically not that much cheaper than Portra at this point, especially considering that if you buy Vision 3 film 250D with the remjet and everything, you know, kind of the base stock, that's going to be much cheaper depending on where you buy it. I see some retailers online selling a roll for 10 bucks maybe. So, you know, that's a big difference, you know, and it adds up fast at scale. But of course, for Vision 3, you then have to deal with the remjet. So if you're processing film at home on your own, probably not that big a deal. You don't really have to think too hard and you can do it yourself. If you're relying on labs, typically, you obviously, the typical labs that do a lot of C41 film, you're going to have a problem there. If you're looking to do ECN2 developing, which is very popular now, and a lot of labs are offering that, then, you know, 250D, the base stock with the remjet, that is something worth spending money on. And I made other videos about it. You can check this one right here. But you know, there's a lot of options now with the same kind of base film stock, and it's nice because it gives you a lot of control as to what you want to do with the colors and with the results and the contrast and the scanning and all of that. So I'm really happy that we have these choices because it seems like every day the options are dwindling. All right, y'all, that's the video for today. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and like that video and don't forget to subscribe. All right, y'all, to the next one. I'm out.